was 68, the day my own son stood in my garage and told me I needed to step aside. He had my papers in his hands, my house keys in his pocket, and a look on his face I'd never seen before, something colder than disrespect. I didn't argue. I just stood there, feeling the ground shift under my feet. Families don't break in a single moment, but sometimes one moment shows you the truth. And this one, well, it changed everything. Makes you wonder what a moment like that would reveal in your life. I had my hands under the hood of my old Chevy pickup, the one my wife drove until the week she passed. I still keep it running, even though I don't take it far anymore. There's something steady about tightening a bolt or listening to an engine settle into a calm rhythm. It's one of the few things in my life that hasn't changed since she died 3 years ago. Most afternoons look the same. I check the truck, I sweep the garage, I fix something small that doesn't really need fixing. It helps me stay grounded. Grief bends time in strange ways, and routine is the only thing that reminds me where I am. I heard the side door creak open before I saw him. My son didn't knock. He hasn't knocked in years. He walked straight in like he owned the place. The sharp sound of his dress shoes crossing the concrete floor, cutting through the quiet. "Dad, we need to handle some paperwork." He didn't greet me, just went straight to the old metal safe in the corner, the one his mother painted blue long ago. He punched in the code without asking me, swung it open, and pulled out a stack of folders. I wiped my hands on a rag and watched him from behind. Something about the way he moved, quick, irritated, impatient, told me this wasn't a casual visit. "What paperwork?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he separated 3 documents, tapped them into a neat stack, and turned toward me like a man rehearsing a pitch. "It's just some small forms. Makes things simpler for everything you've got going on. If you sign them now, I can take care of the financial side of the family, so you don't have to stress." I didn't recall telling him I was stressed. I also didn't remember giving him permission to open that safe. He placed the papers on the workbench, shoved a pen in my direction, then scanned the garage like the space bored him. "Come on, Dad, it's easy. Just sign at the bottom." His tone had that edge, soft enough to sound polite, sharp enough to cut if you weren't paying attention. I've heard that tone from him before, usually when he wants something. I picked up the first page. It wasn't small. Nothing about transferring access to accounts or updating ownership signatures was small. My name had been typed like an afterthought. His had been bolded. I kept my voice level. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" He exhaled loudly like I was slowing him down. "Because you overthink everything. I'm trying to help you. You should let me." There it was, that assumption that age equals helplessness, that my silence means agreement, that my grief makes me blind. He leaned closer, tapping the bottom of the page. "Just sign, Dad. It'll make my life easier." The words slipped out before he realized what he'd said, and he corrected himself with a quick shrug. "I mean, it'll make things easier for all of us." My fingers brushed the pen, but I didn't pick it up. I folded the papers instead, slow and careful, and handed them back to him. "I'm not signing anything today." His lips tightened. "You're being difficult for no reason." I didn't respond. I stepped aside so he could leave, letting the conversation end without a fight. He stuffed the papers into his bag with more force than necessary, walked past me, and pushed the door open. No goodbye. No pause. Just gone. The garage felt smaller after he left, like his frustration was still hanging in the air, filling the spaces my wife once kept warm. I set the rag down, closed the hood of the truck, and walked out to the yard. The sun was dropping behind the neighbour's house, laying long shadows across the grass. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the faint hum of traffic from the main road. I've spent most of my life trying to keep peace, at home, at work, everywhere. I was raised to believe a man should hold his anger like a closed fist in his pocket. Don't swing unless you have no choice. Don't speak unless necessary. But as I stood there, watching the sky shift colours, something settled in my chest. A quiet thought I hadn't let myself face until now. My silence wasn't protecting anything anymore. It was erasing me. I stayed there a little longer, not moving, just letting that truth take shape, while the last bit of daylight slipped away behind the trees. The church parking lot felt unusually crowded for a weekday morning, even though the service had ended a few minutes earlier. Folks always lingered after a memorial, talking softly, hugging each other, catching up on news they didn't get to share during the sermon. I usually stayed off to the side, letting people come to me if they wanted to talk. After losing my wife, I learned how to blend into the edges of a crowd without much effort. Today, however, something in the way people glanced over made my stomach tighten. Not the warm look of sympathy I'd grown used to at funerals and remembrance gatherings. These were different, longer, cautious, as if they were trying to read something on my face before they got close. A few approached me with that tilted head look I recognized from hospital social workers. "Are you doing okay, Mr. Carter? You need anything? You holding up all right? You look a little tired." I nodded, gave the same polite smile I always give, thanked them, and watched them drift away. Another pair whispered to each other while pretending to look for their car. I couldn't hear the words, but I understood their tone. People didn't need full sentences to communicate doubt. I reached into my pocket, closing my fingers around the small wooden cross my wife used to keep in her purse. It steadied me enough to move toward my own car. Someone touched my elbow gently. "Oh Lord," I muttered under my breath before turning around. It was my cousin Denise, a woman who never learned to lower her voice in sacred spaces. She squeezed my arm with both hands. "Baby, I heard what's been going on with you. If you ever need anyone to stay with you at night, you call me. Don't be too proud." I frowned. Too proud for what? She blinked, taken aback, then forced a tight smile. "Oh, well, your son told us you've been forgetting things, that you might not be safe alone much longer." I pulled my arm away slowly. "Not safe alone. Forgetting things, he said that?" Denise kept talking, filling silence the way nervous people do, but her words just slid past me. A dull ringing settled in my ears while I stared across the parking lot. My son stood a few rows away, laughing with two relatives as if the morning had no weight at all. He didn't see me looking at him, or maybe he did and chose not to care. More people walked by, offering me soft pats on the back, each touch carrying a hint of pity I hadn't earned. It didn't take much to piece everything together. Whatever he told them last night was growing legs and running. I stepped away from Denise before she could keep going, muttering something about needing air. She called after me, but I kept moving. There was no anger in my feet yet, just a slow heaviness settling across my shoulders. My thoughts kept shifting between two places. One side of me said, let it go. Maybe he didn't mean harm. Maybe he misunderstood something and repeated it wrong. The other side pressed deeper, whispering, this crossed a line. He stole your voice in front of your own family. I walked farther out to the edge of the parking lot where fewer people gathered. A gust of wind carried the smell of fresh cut grass from the field behind the church. It hit me how strange it felt to be pitied for something I hadn't done, hadn't even struggled with. I'm a lot of things, older, slower, sometimes tired in places I can't name. But I'm not confused. I'm not lost. And I certainly haven't forgotten who I am. A silver sedan parked 2 spaces away opened, and an older man stepped out. Slim, grey beard, suit jacket slung carelessly over his shoulder. I recognized that limp before I recognized the man himself. Raymond, I called out. He turned, squinting for a second before his mouth spread into a half smile. Well now, if it isn't Sam Carter. Didn't think I'd see you out here today. Raymond Turner, retired attorney, old friend. The kind of man you could trust to tell you the truth, even when you didn't want to hear it. He walked over slowly, easing his back as he moved. You look troubled, and don't say you aren't. I've known you too long. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Folks been looking at me funny all morning. He grunted. Yep, I noticed. Heard a few things myself before the service started. A tight knot formed in my chest. What did you hear? Raymond tilted his head. Depends. You want the polite version or the real one? Give me the real one. He rested his elbow on the hood of my car, shifted his stance, and lowered his voice. Word going around is that you've had episodes, that your memory's slipping, that you're not managing things the way you used to, and that your boy might step in soon to, quote, handle your affairs. My jaw worked before any sound came out. He said that? People don't invent details that specific unless somebody fed it to them. Raymond's eyes scanned my face, reading between the lines the way only a seasoned lawyer could. Sam, you sure this is just a misunderstanding? I didn't answer immediately. The breeze moved over us, carrying the sounds of car doors closing and children arguing over who got to sit in the front seat. He eased closer. Look, I know you. You don't like conflict, and you love that boy more than he realizes. But something feels off here. Feels intentional. My hands tightened around my wife's cross in my pocket. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Benefit of the doubt is one thing. Handing your life over is another. A long silence followed. Raymond didn't rush me. He just stood there, giving me space to sort through the noise in my head. Part of me wanted to defend my son, wanted to believe he'd never paint me as weak, but another part, the part I kept pushing down, remembered the way he'd shoved those papers across the bench yesterday. The impatience, the sense of entitlement, the absence of any real concern for me. Raymond lowered his voice further. Sam, I've been doing this a long time. When people start whispering before the person in question even knows what's happening, that's not an accident. Somebody's setting a narrative. He tapped the side of his head lightly. And they're doing it fast. My throat felt dry. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to keep your eyes open. That's all. I looked back toward the crowd. My son was shaking hands with the pastor now, smiling wide, looking like the picture of a responsible, caring man. Anyone watching would think he was stepping up for his father. No one would guess he'd tried to make me sign papers I hadn't read. No one would guess he'd told people I wasn't thinking clearly. Raymond followed my gaze. You want me to stick around a bit? No pressure. Sometimes it helps to have a witness if something feels off. I'll be all right. You sure? I nodded. I wasn't completely sure about anything. I just need a minute. Raymond gave my arm a firm squeeze. If you need me, you call. Don't wait until things get messy. He headed back to his sedan, leaving me standing beside my car, watching the crowd thin out. My son finally noticed me and waved from across the lot, like everything was perfectly normal. I didn't wave back. Not out of spite, but because something inside me couldn't lift my hand. People were still talking around me, drifting to their cars, calling children, opening doors. Ordinary Sunday sounds. But the weight of their glances settled heavier each time someone looked my way with sympathy I hadn't asked for. I reached for the driver's door, hesitated, and looked once more toward the church entrance, where a few stragglers lingered. The echo of Raymond's question pressed harder in my mind. You sure it's just a misunderstanding? I started the engine and sat for a moment, letting the low rumble steady the jitter under my ribs. A couple walked past my car, offering a soft smile, the kind reserved for people they believe are slipping away. I pulled out of the lot slowly, trying to convince myself those whispers didn't mean anything, even as the doubt followed me out onto the road. The diner sat at the corner of Gratiot and Elmwood, the same spot it had occupied since the 70s. The stools squeaked, the fryers hissed, and the air carried the familiar mix of coffee and bacon grease that somehow made the place feel steady, no matter what else in life shifted. I took my usual seat at the bar, ordered black coffee, and tried to quiet the noise in my head. A couple of men slid into the booth behind me. Their voices carried easily, not loud, just careless. The way people talk when they assume no one's listening. Heard the Bradshaw plant got bought out last week. Detroit's changing faster than I can keep up. Not Bradshaw, man, that other one. Carter Manufacturing. That's the one being sold off. My hand paused halfway to my mouth. The coffee cooled against my fingers. Yeah, that one. Heard the owner's stepping down, letting his kid handle everything from now on. They're saying the place is as good as gone. A chair scraped across the floor somewhere behind me. My pulse eased into a slow, heavy beat. They were talking about my company as if it were public knowledge that I'd handed things over, like some deal had already happened. The second man lowered his voice. Man's getting old. Folks saying he can't keep up. That's just how it goes. I didn't turn around. Didn't trust my face to stay steady if I did. Instead, I lifted the mug, took a sip, and let the bitterness sit on my tongue, while the rest of their conversation faded into the room's background noise. My company. Being sold. Me stepping down. None of it true. Unless there were things happening behind closed doors I hadn't been allowed near. I set the mug down quietly. Yesterday's incident with my son hovered in the back of my mind, sharp as a fresh bruise. Those documents he'd pushed at me, the pressure in his voice, the way he'd framed everything as help, and then the glances at the church. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the counter. Maybe I really had missed something. Maybe he had already moved pieces I didn't know existed. The waitress refilled my cup without asking. You doing all right today, Mr. Carter? I'm fine, thank you. She smiled politely and moved on. I watched her walk away, wishing fine felt closer to the truth. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an employee at the plant, someone I'd known since he was 19. Sir, your son said not to call you about work anymore. Just checking if that's correct. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred.
That answer should have rolled off my tongue immediately, but I didn't send anything. Not yet. My son was blocking my communication with my own staff, doing it confidently enough to inform them publicly. Another text came through from the office receptionist. He also changed the email password for your account, said he'd forward anything important. Heat crept along the back of my neck. I closed my eyes, letting thoughts settle into something clearer. Locks changed, passwords updated, whispers spreading, paperwork pushed under my nose, and now strangers in a diner talking about a sale I'd never agreed to. My fork pressed into the plate hard enough to scrape. I forced my hand to relax, lifted the napkin, and wiped my mouth even though nothing was on it. Something wasn't right. I slipped a few bills under the cup, stood up, and walked toward the exit. Halfway to the door, I stopped. A quiet instinct told me to turn back. I listened. My feet led me toward the payphone by the restrooms, not because I needed it, but because it gave me a slice of privacy. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old notes I'd been keeping since my wife passed. Among them was a photograph of a drawer lock combination at the office. I'd never told anyone about it. I stepped into the shadowed corner, opened the camera app, and took a picture of the messages from my employees. Then another of the note with the drawer code. A simple act, almost too small to matter, yet it carried a strange weight. My hands didn't tremble, but something underneath them did. The first act of resistance is rarely loud. Sometimes it's a man taking a picture no one knows he took. When I left the diner, the morning breeze felt cooler than before. I drove straight to the plant, not to confront anyone, but to see how deep this lockout went. The guard at the front gate hesitated when he saw me. Morning, Mr. Carter. Morning. Open up. He swallowed before answering. Sir, your son left instructions yesterday. He said you weren't coming in for a while, something about rest. I leaned out the window a little. Are you refusing me entry? No, sir, just telling you what he said. He reached for the button with an apologetic nod and opened the gate. I drove through slowly, feeling eyes trail my car from the windows of the guard shack. Inside the building, the hallway lights flickered as I walked toward my office. My key slid into the doorknob but refused to turn. I tried again. Nothing. The lock had been changed. I stood there, hand still on the key, letting the truth settle in without collapsing under it. Footsteps echoed behind me. A young engineer, Miles, stopped when he recognized me. Oh, Mr. Carter, I thought you were out today. Why would I be out? He shifted nervously. Your son said you'd be taking some time off to, get things sorted. He told us to direct everything to him. I nodded once. I see. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers closing around the phone. I tapped the screen, hit record, and held it casually at my side. Miles, did he mention why he changed my lock? His eyes widened. I didn't know he did that. I'm sorry, sir. I really am. We're all just trying to follow instructions. I stopped the recording without showing any reaction. Go on with your day. He hurried off, leaving me alone in the hallway.
Before leaving the building, I walked to the maintenance room and checked the old inventory key box. One of the spare keys, the master that opens every drawer, still hung there. My son must have overlooked it. I slipped it into my pocket. Small things, a picture, a recording, a key. Not enough to start a fight, not enough to win one, just enough to tell myself that I wasn't disappearing quietly. The guard nodded as I walked back to my truck. I didn't speak, didn't trust my voice not to crack. Instead, I started the engine and let it idle while I sat there, staring at the building I'd built with my own hands. For the first time, the place felt unfamiliar, as if someone had walked into my life with a broom and begun sweeping me out of it. I backed out slowly, watching the plant shrink in my rear-view mirror, while a question formed, sharp, unwelcome, impossible to ignore, and followed me all the way home. The hallway outside the small conference room buzzed with tense chatter. I stepped inside and found nearly every department head packed around the table, some standing against the wall. My son sat at the far end, elbows spread wide like the seat belonged to him. A thin stack of binders lay in front of him, neatly aligned, color-coded, prepared, too prepared for something supposedly urgent. He didn't look up when I entered. "We'll get started, everyone." A few people exchanged glances. Some nodded politely in my direction. Others looked away quickly, unsure of what expression felt appropriate. I took a chair near the side, close enough to hear everything, far enough from the head of the table that no one mistook this for shared leadership. My son cleared his throat. "As you all know, we're making several adjustments to streamline operations. It's time for us to be honest about where we are and who's capable of handling what." My fingers tightened around the pen I carried, a habit from years of taking notes in rooms like this. The pen helped me focus. "Over the past few months, we've noticed concerning gaps in oversight," he continued. "Missed signatures, delayed approvals, unclear decisions." A flutter went through the room. Faces stiffened, eyes darting toward me, then quickly away. He flipped open one of the binders, and after careful consideration, "I believe my father is no longer in a position to manage the demands of our day-to-day operations. He's earned his rest." The tone sounded gentle, but the words had an edge sharp enough to draw blood. Someone whispered near the back, "Is he retiring?" Another answered, "Thought he already stepped back." I leaned forward. He shot her a warning glance, then turned the binder toward the group. "For clarity, I've prepared a revised structure. All decisions will route through me until further notice. To ease the workload on my father, we've disabled his system access for now." My breath stopped for a second. Disabled. Not paused, not adjusted. Disabled. A few employees stiffened. One of the engineers, Marcus, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it when my son lifted a hand slightly. A gesture too subtle for most, but not for me. I knew that gesture. It meant, "Don't interfere." I leaned back in my chair, forcing the tension in my shoulders to settle. "You disabled my access without authorization." My son didn't flinch. "It was necessary. You've been under strain and making inconsistent decisions. The team needed clarity." The word inconsistent scraped against my patience. "If you had concerns about my decisions, you should have addressed them with me directly." He sighed the way a teacher sighs at a stubborn student.
Dad, meetings with you have become unpredictable. Sometimes you're present, sometimes you drift. We can't run a company on uncertainty. People are worried. The conference room dimmed, not literally, but in the sense that the air felt heavier, thicker, harder to breathe. The people who had worked beside me until then, I'm responsible for all signatures, approvals, and operations. Any questions? He had the nerve to look at me as he asked it. The challenge sat in his expression like a coiled rope, daring me to pull. I didn't give him that satisfaction. If this is your decision, then you carry the consequences. And that was all I said. After the meeting ended, people dispersed quickly, pretending to be late to other tasks. A few muttered something that sounded like sympathy. Others, the chair at the head of the table, my chair, remained pulled out like me, as though someone had been sitting there minutes before. It looked unfamiliar now, like something on display rather than a place I belonged. I rested my hands on the table and let the truth land without fighting it. If I kept quiet, a wooden bench near the river had become a place I went when life pressed too hard. Detroit's water slid by in a slow, steady line, carrying things I couldn't name, and memories I tried not to revisit. I sat there late that afternoon, with an envelope resting on my knee, the flap already torn open. No return address, no handwritten note, just a set of pages folded twice. The first page froze me where I sat. My name, my signature, my company, transferred. The signature looked close enough to fool a stranger, maybe even an accountant on a rushed day. But it wasn't mine. I'd spent years signing documents. I could recognize the pressure of my own pen stroke. The slant was wrong. The curl at the end was too stiff. Someone had studied it, practiced it, copied it. And whoever sent this had slipped it into my mailbox without anyone noticing. I held the paper in both hands, trying to steady my breath. A stray gust rippled through it, but I tightened my grip until the shaking stopped. For a moment, I drifted back to the night my wife whispered her last coherent words to me. She'd squeezed my hand weakly and said, "Don't disappear, Sam. Don't let grief make you small. You've carried too much alone." I'd promised her I wouldn't shrink. I'd broken that promise without realizing it. A crunch of gravel behind me pulled me back. Raymond approached, jacket slung over one shoulder, face drawn with concern. "Heard you were down here," he said. "Thought I'd check in." I gestured at the spot beside me. He sat slowly, stretching his leg before resting his hands on his thighs. "You look like you've seen something you wish you hadn't." I passed him the pages. He read each one with the careful patience of a man who'd spent a lifetime weighing fine print. His jaw tightened as he flipped to the second sheet. "That's a forged signature," he muttered. "No question." "I know." He handed the papers back. "This didn't fall out of the sky. Somebody wanted you to have it." The river moved quietly, forming small ripples that drifted outward until they vanished. "You think it's connected to everything happening at the company?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze followed the water, as if the river helped him organize his thoughts. "Sam, this isn't just family tension. This is strategy. Look at the pattern. Controlling information, isolating you, creating the idea that you're unstable, shifting authority
restricting access. That's not clumsy. It's intentional. A small knot formed in my stomach. My own son. Blood doesn't make people honest, he said evenly, and love doesn't make them harmless. I lowered my head, elbows resting on my knees. The weight behind my ribs grew heavier, but something else surfaced beneath it. A quiet clarity I hadn't felt in years. Raymond leaned forward. There's more, isn't there? I took my phone from my pocket and showed him the recordings, the texts from employees, the photos I'd taken.
He scrolled through them, brow tightening with each detail. He's building a narrative, Sam, a legal one. If he convinces enough people you're impaired, he can seize everything outright. Guardianship, property, business, everything. The bench creaked as I shifted. He wouldn't go that far. Raymond looked at me with a softness that held no illusions. He already has. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. An email notification slid across the screen, sent from a corporate account handled by our administrative team. Effective immediately, please vacate your residence for a scheduled mental competency evaluation. This assessment is required for executive safety protocols. Arrangements for temporary housing will be provided. I read it twice. My vision didn't blur, but my breath caught like a door that wouldn't open. Vacate your residence. Mental competency evaluation. Temporary housing. This wasn't advice or a suggestion. It was an order, not from a doctor, not from a court, but from my own company, from my son. Raymond stiffened beside me. He sent that? Through the company. That's worse. That means he's using corporate authority as leverage. If you comply, he can use it as proof you acknowledged incapacity. If you refuse, he can claim you're uncooperative and escalated. I closed the email and stared out at the river again. A foam cup drifted past, caught in an eddy, spun twice, then slipped free and continued downstream. For months, maybe longer, I'd convinced myself things would settle, that if I stayed calm, if I stepped back slightly, if I didn't challenge him, he'd find his footing and remember who raised him. But he hadn't found footing. He'd found opportunity. Raymond tapped the envelope gently. You can't let him move unchecked, not anymore. Something in my chest shifted. Not anger, something steadier. A kind of resolve that felt both old and newly sharpened. What do I do now? I asked quietly. Raymond stood, stretching his leg before offering me a hand. First, you stop pretending this is confusion or emotion. It's a takeover, and takeovers have rules. I rose from the bench slowly. My knees complained, but I barely registered it. The envelope hung at my side, crinkled from how hard I'd held it. A jogger passed us on the trail. A child laughed somewhere behind us near the swings. Life carried on around me like none of this existed. Meanwhile, everything I'd spent decades building was being stripped away, piece by piece. Raymond brushed dirt off his pant leg. We'll meet tomorrow morning. Bring every document you've copied, every message, every detail you think is small. Small things stack into big things fast. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. He walked toward the parking lot, leaving me standing beneath a cluster of trees. The river rolled by, steady and unbothered, carrying whatever the city tossed into it. My phone buzzed again. Another message from an employee. Your son says not to contact you directly anymore. Is everything okay? I slipped the phone into my pocket and headed toward the bridge path, letting the next step choose itself while my mind sorted through the only truth left standing. Silence had stopped working. Raymond's office sat above a shuttered tailor shop downtown, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you knew to look for it. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and paper. He unlocked the door, flicked on a desk lamp, and motioned me inside. No small talk, no warm-up. We both knew why we were there. Stacks of binders covered the conference table. My binders, his binders, documents he'd already started pulling from public records. He'd arranged everything with a kind of weary precision, like a man who'd spent a lifetime preparing for fights other people tried to avoid. "Sit," he said. "We've got work to do." Hours slipped by as we spread papers across the table. Employment agreements, board minutes, bank statements, old emails I'd forwarded to myself before the system locked me out. He asked questions in a steady rhythm, rarely looking up, only reaching for more documents or highlighting something that didn't fit. My mind, still raw from the past few weeks, settled into a slow, deliberate groove. "This signature," he murmured, turning one page sideways. "Whoever forged it didn't understand the natural angle of your stroke. He only ever saw it on birthday cards or insurance forms," I replied. "And that's why he got it wrong." He slid the forged contract aside and pulled out another file. "Here, compare these dates. Your son filed a notice of intent to transfer assets before he restricted your access. That shows premeditation." I read the timestamp twice. I didn't know about any of this. "That's why we document," he said calmly. "People hide things. Paper doesn't." The longer we worked, the quieter I became. Not withdrawn, just focused. Emotion peeled away until only purpose remained. Raymond kept his tone level, but I could tell he tracked each shift in my breathing, each pause before I answered, each moment I weighed a memory against what sat in front of me. Around 10, I reached for a folder and noticed my hand had stopped shaking. My voice no longer cracked when I read something aloud. The anger that had been buzzing under my ribs all week loosened until it became something sharper, something I could actually use. "This isn't just about him taking the company," I said. "It's the story he's building around it." Raymond nodded. "Exactly. He's crafting a record, not truth, paperwork. If he can show a pattern of concern, he can justify whatever comes next." I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "And what comes next?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The last time I felt this steady was years ago, during the months after my wife died. Grief had hollowed me out, but routine saved me. Lists, appointments, repairs I could manage alone. This night reminded me of those early days, except now the weight didn't come from loss. It came from clarity. Close to midnight, Raymond switched to printed emails, ones I hadn't seen before. "These popped up in my inbox this afternoon," he said. "Someone inside the company is forwarding internal messages." He handed me one. It was short. "Board briefing moved. They're preparing something. Keep him safe." No name, no signature. Just that. My chest tightened. "Someone's watching out for me?" I asked. "Maybe. Or someone's playing both sides. Either way, you needed to see it." He set that email aside, then picked up another. This one far more unsettling. "Control the narrative. If he resists, escalate." A third message.
By Friday, his access should be fully terminated. Make sure the staff understands the mental health angle.
I leaned back, feeling the chair press into my spine. They're poisoning the well, I muttered. Raymond gathered the emails into a pile, which is why we build our own timeline, our own proof. He took out a thumb drive and slid it across the table. Back up everything you have tonight, not tomorrow, not when you get home, now. I loaded the files silently. The hum of the computer filled the room, steady and low. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another odd notification. An email from an account I didn't recognize. Subject line blank. Inside it, just 2 words. They're close. I showed it to Raymond. He frowned. Could be a warning, could be intimidation, could be nonsense, but you document it anyway. He printed it, added it to a growing stack. The floor creaked beneath us as a streetcar rattled past outside, but neither of us moved. Another hour slipped by before he finally leaned back, rubbing his eyes. We're building a case that shows coercion, forgery, and deliberate misrepresentation. If this goes to court, the evidence will hold. I nodded, even though court wasn't what I pictured. I didn't want to bury my son. I wanted the truth, and I wanted my life back, my home, my company, my dignity. Raymond pushed a legal pad toward me. Write down anything you remember. Names, dates, comments he made, what he asked you to sign and when, anything that didn't feel right. My pen hovered over the page. Memories flickered, seemingly small things I'd brushed aside. Missed calls. Doors closed too quickly. Employees who avoided eye contact. A locked filing cabinet that had never been locked before. I wrote until the page filled. When I set the pen down, my phone vibrated again. Another message, but this one wasn't email. It came through the old landline number forwarded to my cell. Unknown caller. Voicemail only. 10 seconds long. I played it on speaker. Nothing at first, just static. Then a faint voice, rushed and strained. You don't have time. He's moving faster than you think. The message ended there. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Raymond finally stood, grabbed a manila envelope, and began packing documents with tighter movements than before. The calm in his voice stayed, but something in his posture stiffened, like a man preparing for a storm he'd hoped would pass north. Sam, whatever this is, it's bigger than family conflict. You need to be ready on all fronts. I slipped the thumb drive into my jacket. I will be. He glanced at the clock. Go home. Keep your lights on. Don't answer the door for anyone unless you know them. And call me the minute something changes. We locked the office behind us. The hallway felt cooler than when we'd arrived. A figure stood at the far end near the stairwell, put up, hands in pockets. Too still, too interested. Raymond noticed him at the same moment I did. Keep walking, he murmured. We headed for the stairs. The figure didn't follow, but he didn't turn away either. He just waited there, watching until the door closed behind us. Outside, the street was empty except for cars parked along the curb. Headlights from a passing SUV swept across the storefronts. My truck sat a few spaces down. A small white card was tucked beneath my windshield wiper. Raymond reached it first and handed it to me. No name, no number, just 3 printed words. Not too late. I slid the card into my pocket and climbed into the truck. The engine rumbled beneath me, steady but old, like it had more to say if I gave it the chance. For a while, I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, thinking of forged signatures, anonymous emails, someone lingering outside my home earlier that week, and a voice warning me I was out of time. The river had carried its message. Tonight delivered another. Whatever wave was coming, it wasn't small, and I finally understood I'd better be standing when it broke. The elevator doors opened onto the quiet wing where the hospital kept its medical records. A volunteer pointed me toward a glass window with a small sign taped to it. I gave my name, filled out 2 forms, and waited while the clerk disappeared into the back. I'd come for my wife's old files, documents I'd avoided for years. Something in that forged contract had pushed me back here, as if her handwriting or the memory of her voice might steady me enough to keep going. The clerk returned holding a folder and an odd look on her face. "Mr. Carter, before I hand this over, I just need to confirm something." "All right, go ahead." "Your son called last week asking for copies as well. He said he needed them for the medical power of attorney you were signing over." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. "I'm not signing any power of attorney." "Oh, well, that's what he told us." "Should I update the note on your file?" "Yes." My voice came out firmer than I expected. "Remove anything that says he has authority over my decisions." She hesitated. "He sounded very sure, sir. He even asked about your cognitive evaluation schedule." "What evaluation?" She didn't have an answer, just an uncomfortable silence that said enough. I thanked her, took the folder, and stepped aside. My hands had gone cold, and for a moment I just stood there in the hallway, letting everything settle in strange, heavy pieces. A nurse passed by, nodded politely, then slowed. "Sir, are you all right? You look pale." "Just tired," I said. She gave me a sympathetic smile, the same one people have been giving me for weeks. The smile that said they'd already chosen a version of the story I wasn't allowed to correct. I walked to the end of the hallway, found a long bench and sat with the folder in my lap. My wife's name was written across the tab in her looping cursive. I traced the letters with my thumb, remembering how she used to sign her holiday cards with extra flourishes just to make me laugh. Before I could open it, my phone buzzed. A new email from the court system. "Your petition for competency review will be scheduled within 10 to 14 business days." I stared at the screen until the words lost shape. A second notification followed, this time from my son. "Dad, don't panic. This is standard procedure. We just need legal confirmation that someone can help manage things. We'll talk later." Standard procedure. For who? And for what? A hospital receptionist called out a patient's name in the distance. A janitor pushed a cart of supplies down the corridor. Life continued around me, as if nothing had shifted. But inside my chest, something cracked, like old timber under pressure. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, breathing carefully. Not crying, not shaking, just trying to understand how far this had gone without me seeing it. Footsteps approached, steady, deliberate ones I recognized. Raymond appeared at the corner, scanning until he spotted me. "I figured you'd be here," he said, sliding onto the bench beside me. "How did you know?" "You've been circling your wife's memory for days. When a man is pushed to the edge, he usually returns to the person who kept him steady." I didn't argue. No point. He studied my expression. "You got the court notice?" I nodded and handed him my phone. He skimmed the message and exhaled sharply. This isn't impulsive. He planned every step. Medical records, court petitions, power of attorney requests. He's building a legal narrative that paints you as incapable of handling your own affairs. People believe him, I muttered. People believe what's repeated the loudest, he replied. And what happens now? Raymond clasped his hands. First, we stop the petition before the judge signs off on a preliminary order. Then we file our own motion, asserting that these actions amount to coercion and fraudulent intent. But Sam, listen to me. This isn't about a disagreement anymore. He's attempting a full transfer of control. Home, company, finances, medical authority. All of it. My throat tightened. He thinks I'm weak enough to let him. No, he hopes you're still silent. Raymond's voice dropped. And silence is the one thing you can't afford now. Down the hallway, a young mother tried calming her child. A stretcher rolled out of a nearby room. A doctor scribbled notes on a chart. Everything looked normal, almost peaceful, which made the pressure in my chest feel even heavier. I opened my wife's file. Her handwriting filled the first page, lists of medications, phone numbers, reminders. She'd written, "Sam handles the rest. He always does." A lump formed in my throat. Not grief. Recognition. She had trusted me to carry things when they got heavy. She never doubted my judgment. She never treated me like a burden. Raymond touched my shoulder lightly. We'll challenge everything he filed, but I need you steady. I need you present. You can't disappear into this the way you did after she passed. I closed the file gently. He told the hospital I was giving him medical authority. And you're not. He told the court I can't think clearly. And you can. I nodded slowly, letting his certainty settle over me like a weighted blanket. But the hallway around us blurred for a moment, not visually, just in meaning. I could hear the murmurs of nurses, the squeak of shoes on tile, the rhythmic beeping from a distant monitor. All those sounds mixing with the thought pulsing in my skull. He doesn't plan to stop. The court petition, the hospital call, the forged signature, the locked office, the staged concern. Each one was a piece of a structure he'd been assembling brick by brick. And I had been standing still, hoping the storm would pass. Raymond checked his watch. We should leave soon. You've had enough hits for one day. I pressed my palms against my thighs, grounding myself. I need a minute. He nodded, rose quietly, and walked toward the elevators. I stayed on that bench, not moving, not speaking, just breathing through the weight of everything collapsing around me. A couple walked past, whispering. An orderly rolled a tray toward the nurses' station. Someone laughed down the hall. Life kept flowing, indifferent to whatever battle was unfolding inside my chest. I bent forward again, feeling the folder press against my side. For the first time, the thought wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disbelief. It was understanding. He will take everything if I let him. I stood slowly, gripping the file under my arm, and walked toward the exit. No plan yet, no speech prepared, no certainty beyond one simple truth. If I stayed quiet any longer, there wouldn't be anything left to fight for. Raymond chose the back warehouse behind the company because no one used it anymore. The building leaned into the wind like it had given up years before, the metal siding rattling with every gust. He stood near the loading ramp, hands buried in his coat pockets, nodding for me to follow him inside. The air held a faint scent of oil and dust. He didn't bother with small talk. I found something you need to hear,
A small recorder appeared from his pocket. He pressed play without warning. My son's voice came through first, clear, casual, almost bored. Once he's in the facility, nobody questions the paperwork. We can liquidate what's left without interference. A second voice, smooth, professional, the kind brokers use when they're pretending they're helping you. You're sure your father won't fight it? He won't. He never does. He'll grumble, maybe, but he'll fold. He always folds. The recorder clicked off. The warehouse settled into a long silence. I stared at the empty pallets stacked against the wall, trying to breathe through the pressure tightening around my ribs. "When was that recorded?" I asked. "Last Tuesday," Raymond answered. "A whistleblower sent it anonymously. I verified the broker's number myself." My throat felt dry. So he wasn't just pushing me. He was planning the ending. Raymond didn't soften it. Yes, the recorder looked small in his palm, but the weight of it felt heavy enough to tilt the entire room. A part of me wanted to sit down. Another part wanted to walk out the door and keep walking until my legs gave out. Instead, I stayed where I was, hands steady at my sides. "This is the leverage he thinks you don't have," Raymond said. He finally met my eyes. "Sam, he's overplayed his hand." "Maybe, but he isn't reckless. He's calculated every step." "True." He stepped closer. "But he made one mistake. He assumed you wouldn't push back." I let the words settle. They didn't feel like flattery, just an observation stated plainly. Raymond slid the recorder across an overturned crate toward me. "This goes into evidence, but right now, it's for you. Proof you're not imagining what's happening." I picked it up. The plastic felt warm from his hand. A shred of relief moved through me. Not joy, not satisfaction. Just the faint sense that the ground wasn't tilting quite as hard under my feet. Outside, a truck downshifted on the main road. The rumble travelled through the walls like a low warning. "He's going to deny every bit of this," I said. "Of course. People like him always deny what's obvious, and they talk circles until everyone else doubts their own memory. He's good at that." "Too good," Raymond replied. "It hides a flaw." I frowned. "What flaw?" "He thinks confidence is the same as invisibility. He believes if he walks into a room without fear, nobody will question him. That kind of arrogance leaves fingerprints everywhere." He picked up a folder from a nearby shelf, one of the ones he'd brought earlier. "He's sloppy with details, sloppy with dates, sloppy with the way he speaks about you when he thinks no one is listening." A faint hum filled my chest. Not anger, not pride. Something more like recognition. My son always had a need to be the smartest voice in the room. That flaw had been small when he was a teenager, annoying when he was in college, and now, dangerous. "What's next?" I asked. Raymond rested the folder against his thigh. "You prepare for the confrontation, quietly, directly, on your terms, not his." The warehouse door clanged against its frame as a gust of wind pushed through the gaps. Dust drifted from the rafters. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my son. "Dad, please stop letting people confuse you. None of this pressure would exist if you trusted me. We need to talk." The timing wasn't coincidence. He sensed movement, a shift he couldn't name yet. I tucked the phone away. "He knows something's coming," I said. "Let him guess," Raymond replied. "He'll reach harder, make bolder moves, and the bolder he gets, the more mistakes he'll leave behind." I nodded slowly.
He thinks silence is my weakness. It was, Raymond said, until now. The wind shook the siding again. The sound echoed off the empty walls. I walked toward the exit, holding the recorder inside my jacket. Every step felt heavier, but firmer somehow, like I'd finally placed my feet on ground that wouldn't shift beneath me. At the doorway, I paused. That recording, my voice stayed steady. It's enough to break him, isn't it? Raymond joined me at the threshold. It's enough to expose him. Breaking him will come from everything else he's done. And he's done plenty. The outdoor air felt colder than when I'd arrived. Cars rolled past the street behind the warehouse, coming and going in a steady rhythm. I leaned on the railing for a moment. He was my boy, I said quietly. He still is, Raymond answered. But that doesn't change what he's done. I exhaled slowly, watching nothing in particular. Raymond headed toward his car. I'll see you tomorrow. We've got a lot to organize before the hearing. I stayed a moment longer, letting the wind shift around me, letting the knowledge sink into my bones. My son thought power made him untouchable. He thought my quiet was his shelter. He thought I would bend the way I always had. But arrogance has a way of leaving a trail behind it, and now I finally saw the cracks he'd been hiding under all that confidence. The boardroom doors were already open when I reached them. Voices drifted out, low, tense, uncertain. My son's voice rose above the rest, polished and steady, the way he always sounded when he wanted a room to believe he had everything under control. I stepped inside without announcing myself. Chairs shifted. Conversations stopped. A few board members straightened, as if they weren't sure whether to stand or offer condolences. My son froze halfway through a sentence. Dad, you weren't scheduled to... I set my briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and laid the first folder flat. No apology, no greeting, just the sound of paper meeting wood. I'll speak first, I said. He opened his mouth, but Raymond, seated in the back, cleared his throat. The kind of sound that said, let him finish. I didn't look at anyone directly. I let my hand drift from one document to the next. These are the forged signatures submitted to the county clerk. These are the dates your office filed transfer notices before you claimed I agreed. This, I pressed the small recorder's button. My son's voice filled the room. Once he's in the facility, nobody questions the paperwork. We can liquidate what's left without interference. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Board members leaned forward. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. My son shot to his feet. That recording is taken out of context. You don't know what you're doing. You are not well enough to pass these things, Dad. Everyone here has seen the signs. He turned to the board, spreading his arms as if pleading with them. You've all watched him slip. Forget appointments, misplaced documents, repeat stories. He's confused. And someone, he glared at Raymond, someone is manipulating him. I didn't raise my voice. I forgot one appointment. The documents were locked in the office you sealed. And the story I repeated was one you tried to erase. His jaw clenched. You're proving my point. You're agitated. You're paranoid. You're not making stable decisions. I petitioned the court because I'm trying to protect you. I eased another folder forward. This is the petition you filed, stating I cannot manage my own affairs. On the same day, you signed an agreement to transfer the company's trademarks into a shell entity. I rotated the page so the board could see the timestamp. His confidence slipped,
A thin line of sweat formed near his temple. Dad, these legal terms confuse you. You're being fed misinformation. You can't trust. You did the same thing to the hospital. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the documents. Told them I was assigning you medical authority. Told them I requested it. Told them I was preparing for long-term placement. He swallowed, eyes darting around the table. I was trying to keep you safe. By locking me out of my own accounts. Temporary measure. Changing the board's access codes. They asked me to. And forging my name. The room fell so silent I could hear the hum of the ceiling vent. He stepped back, bumping the chair behind him. This isn't fair. You're ambushing me.
You don't know what you're saying. You don't understand what's at stake here. You're not capable of. He won't fight. He never does. I repeated his words from the recording. Someone exhaled sharply. Someone else whispered, "My God." His eyes snapped to me, wide and jittering. You don't know what you're doing. I finally looked at him. Really looked. The polished veneer was gone. What stood there wasn't a leader or a strategist, just a man who'd taken advantage of the father who trusted him too long. I reached into my briefcase and placed one last document on the table. Raymond sat forward. The board leaned in. My son didn't breathe. This is the part you didn't expect, I said. The assets you chased. The company's stock you tried to reassign. The property you assumed was in your reach. I tapped the page with one finger. They're not yours to take. They were never going to be. My son frowned. What are you talking about? I slid the deed forward. 5 years ago, after your mother got sick, I consolidated ownership into a trust, one you never bothered to read, one that clearly states the controlling rights pass only to me, solely to me. He stared at it, lips parting. I opened the second envelope. And this is the amendment I filed 6 months later, naming myself the exclusive trustee should any family member attempt to manipulate or coerce me. His hand twitched toward the document, then stopped halfway, frozen in the air. You made me work for something I never even stood to inherit. No, I protected what your mother and I built, and I protected it from you. The board exchanged looks, some shocked, some disgusted. A woman at the far end closed her notebook and leaned back, crossing her arms with a slow shake of her head. My son sagged into his chair as if the weight finally hit him. So all this, his voice cracked. Everything I did, all for nothing. Not nothing, I said quietly. You showed them who you are. For a moment, he looked like a child who'd reached too high and finally felt the fall. His fingers pressed against his forehead, his shoulders hunched. He didn't speak. I gathered the folders, stacking them neatly. Raymond stood ready to walk out with me. One board member cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, shall we call for a vote to remove him from all active duties? My son jolted, eyes wide. You can't do that. You can't just cut me out of my own. He stopped when he realized the board wasn't looking at him. They were looking at me. Raymond opened the door. I carried the stack of documents under one arm and nodded to the room. Not triumph, not anger, just acknowledgement. My son whispered something, but I didn't try to catch it. It wasn't for me anymore.
I stepped into the hallway, letting the door close behind me as the muffled voices rose again, this time without him leading them. No applause, no victory speech, just the quiet sound of my shoes moving down a corridor I once built a life inside of, and the weight of the files resting steady in my hands. The porch boards creaked under my weight as I settled into the chair my wife used to claim every summer evening. The sun hovered low, turning the yard a muted gold. I let the quiet sink in before opening the envelope resting on my lap. The final set of documents waited inside. No drama, no tricks, just a few signatures standing between the life I'd reclaimed and the last thread tying my son to what he'd tried to take. A breeze moved through the hedges. I breathed with it, slow and steady, the way Raymond taught me when tension sat too deep in my chest. I'd spent months fighting numbers, signatures, revised deeds, forged agreements, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. This was the first moment I'd had to sit still and look directly at the one thing I'd avoided naming. The part I played. I pulled the first page free and held it against my knee. Somewhere along the way, maybe when my wife died, maybe long before, I'd confused love with surrender. I lifted every burden, smoothed every rough patch, gave every advantage, told myself I was doing it to protect him, to honor his mother's hopes, to keep our home steady. But I had been raising a boy without showing him edges, without teaching him that boundaries weren't punishments. They were the lines that made a man reliable, honest, safe to trust. I'd handed him access, confidence, and trust in amounts no one should receive without earning it. He took all of it and wanted more. A car slowed near the curb. I didn't look up. People had been circling the house all week. Reporters, process servers, attorneys delivering notices to both sides. Everyone wanted a statement. No one was getting one. News had already leaked. He'd been removed from the company, stripped of his titles, placed under investigation for coercion and fraudulent filings. The kid who used to follow me around with a toolbox now had subpoenas piling up on his doorstep. I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel vindicated, didn't feel like I'd won, just tired and steady. I reached for the second page, the one that needed my signature to finalize his removal from any remaining claim to the trust. No loopholes, no appeals, no backdoor route he could exploit. He'd called yesterday, 3 times, left one message. "Dad, I just need a chance to explain. You can't let them do this to me." Them. Not, "I did this." Not, "I crossed a line." Just blame cast outward, the same way he'd done since childhood, whenever consequences came too close. Raymond told me I didn't have to respond, so I didn't. A cicada buzzed in the trees. The world carried on, while my pen scratched across the signature line. My name looked cleaner than usual, unshaken, as if my hand had finally caught up with the man I'd been forced to become. I moved to the next page. Another signature. Then the final one, confirming his removal from inheritance, ownership, and management. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't anger. It was housekeeping. Long overdue, painful, necessary. Footsteps approached from inside the house. Raymond stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. "You finished?" he asked. "Almost." He set one mug near my elbow
and leaned on the railing instead of hovering. He knew better than to crowd me in moments like this. I signed the last page and closed the folder. The sound felt final in a way nothing else had. Raymond didn't speak for a while. Eventually, he asked, "You want me to file these in the morning?" "Yes." He nodded, pushed his glasses up, and stepped back inside without another word. He understood that this chapter wasn't his to witness.
I stayed where I was, the folder closed under my palm.
The yard had shifted into softer colours. The air grew cooler. Someone's dog barked down the block. Everything around me felt familiar again. Not like a memory, but like a space I actually lived in. My house, my porch, my life. Not something I was being managed through. A car door slammed somewhere nearby. Tires hit gravel. Someone called a greeting across the street. The world kept moving, and for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next blow. No relief washed through me, no grief either. Just a clean stillness settling into my bones. I gathered the signed pages, slid them into the envelope, and carried the folder inside. The door clicked shut behind me. Simple, quiet, final. Tomorrow the paperwork would move through the system. Hearings would follow, statements, decisions, whatever consequences the law required for forged signatures, false petitions, and attempted control of a vulnerable adult.
It was out of my hands now, in the most ordinary and rightful way. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, next to the old ceramic bowl my wife used to keep her keys in. A thin line of sunlight still reached it from the porch. No anger stirred in me. No forgiveness either. Those things belong to stories that try to wrap life in neat endings. I wasn't searching for an ending, just room to breathe again. I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and walked deeper into my own home, with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, carrying nothing but the quiet that comes when a man finally steps back into a life that was always supposed to be his.